My name's Diana, I'm 34, and 10 years ago, my own brother looked me in the eyes at Thanksgiving dinner, called me trash, and told the family I'd never be anything. That night changed everything for me. I'll never forget the sting of his words, or how silent everyone else stayed. But what happened after? That's the part no one expected. Before I begin, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about family drama, revenge, and courage. I'll never forget that night. Thanksgiving, the one holiday where families are supposed to gather, eat, laugh, and set their differences aside. For me, it became the night that split my life in two. I was 24 then, still figuring myself out, still stumbling through jobs that barely paid rent, and still holding on to the hope that family, at least, was a safe place. My brother, Mark, was 3 years older. He had the job, the car, the suburban house, the golden child of our small Midwestern family. I'd always known he looked down on me, but until that night, I never imagined just how deep his contempt ran. The house smelled like roasted turkey and pumpkin pie. Plates clattered, cousins laughed in the living room, and my aunt kept pouring wine into glasses whether people asked or not. I was standing near the kitchen island, spooning mashed potatoes onto my plate, when it happened. Mark's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Why don't you just stop pretending, Diana? You're trash. You'll never be anything." At first, I thought I'd misheard him. The room went quiet so fast, it was like someone had hit mute on the TV. My spoon clattered onto the plate. Every eye turned toward me, waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to crumble. I tried to laugh it off, to act like maybe he was joking. "Excuse me." My voice shook, but I forced a smile, praying someone would step in and tell him to knock it off. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said louder, "You heard me. You're wasting your life, bouncing from one job to another. You're nothing but a burden, Diana. Trash." My chest burned. Heat rushed up my neck. I glanced around the table, searching for someone, anyone, to defend me. My mother stared at her plate, cutting her turkey into tiny pieces. My uncle cleared his throat but said nothing. A cousin reached for the cranberry sauce, pretending not to hear. The silence was worse than the insult. It told me everything. They agreed, or at least, they didn't care enough to stand up for me. "Mark," I whispered, trying to steady my voice. "That's not fair. You don't know what I'm going through." He smirked. "Going through? Please. You're 24 and still can't hold a job for 6 months. Don't act like you're some victim. Own it, you're a failure." The words hit harder than any slap could. My fork slipped from my hand, clinking against the china. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to stand tall, even though inside I was collapsing. My aunt, trying to ease the tension, clapped her hands and said, "So, who wants pie?" But the damage was already done. The air was heavy, the laughter gone. My brother had stripped me bare in front of everyone, and no one had come to my defense. I pushed back my chair. "I think I've lost my appetite." My voice cracked, but I kept moving, grabbing my coat from the hallway. As I reached the door, Mark called out one last time, "Don't come crying to us when you hit rock bottom. We're done cleaning up your messes." The door slammed behind me, but his words followed like shadows. Outside, the November air was biting, the sky already black at 6 o'clock. I walked down the block with my hands stuffed in my pockets, my breath coming out in shaky clouds. That walk felt endless. Streetlights flickered overhead, leaves crunched under my boots, and the weight of shame pressed down on my shoulders. I thought about every odd job I'd worked, the diner shifts, the temp agency gigs, the babysitting for neighbors just to scrape together bus fare. I thought about the eviction notice taped to my door 2 months earlier, the nights I'd gone to bed with nothing but ramen in my stomach. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I was trash. But somewhere between the 3rd and 4th block, something shifted. The sting of his words hardened into something else. Not just pain, but anger. A quiet, pulsing anger that whispered, "No. He doesn't get the final word. Not tonight. Not ever." I kept walking, my mind racing. I replayed every insult, every smirk, every time he'd looked down on me. I realized that night wasn't just humiliation, it was clarity. For the first time, I saw exactly where I stood in my family's eyes. And I knew I had two choices: accept it, or change the story. When I finally reached my car, my hands were trembling too hard to put the key in the ignition. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, letting the tears come. The kind of crying that leaves you breathless, your chest aching, your throat raw. But even as I broke down, that voice inside me kept repeating, one day you'll prove them wrong. I drove home in silence, headlights cutting through the dark. My tiny apartment waited for me, the heater broken again, dishes piled in the sink. It was nothing compared to my brother's polished house with the granite countertops and the new SUV parked out front. But it was mine. And for the first time, I felt something stir inside me, a determination I hadn't felt before. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake on my thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying every second of Thanksgiving. My brother's voice echoed in my head, sharp and unforgiving. My mother's silence hurt even more. I realized then that no one was coming to save me. If I wanted a different life, I'd have to carve it out myself. By morning, my eyes were swollen, my body exhausted. But my mind was sharper than ever. I didn't have a plan yet, didn't know what success would look like, but I knew this. The next time I walked into a family gathering, I wouldn't be the one hanging my head. I'd be the one they couldn't ignore. The next morning, I made myself a promise. I didn't speak it out loud, but it burned inside me. I will never forget what he said, and I will never let him be right about me. Still, the days that followed weren't some miraculous turnaround. They were messy, hard, and painfully ordinary. Bills stacked on the counter. My boss at the diner barked orders without looking me in the eye. My shoes wore thin from walking to shifts I barely had energy to finish. I kept my head down, doing what I had to do, but every night, lying on that lumpy mattress, my brother's words replayed in my head like a cruel tape I couldn't turn off. Weeks stretched into months, and then into years. The silence from Mark was absolute. He blocked me on social media, never returned my calls, and when Christmas or birthdays came around, I wasn't included in family plans. At first, I tried, sent him texts, left voicemails, even mailed him a card one year. Nothing. Eventually, I stopped trying. His rejection wasn't just casual. It was deliberate, complete, final. That silence weighed heavier than any insult. It was like I had been erased from the family record. The first year after Thanksgiving, I lost my apartment. Rent was late too many times, and one afternoon I came home to find my belongings stacked in the hallway. I carried what I could in garbage bags to my car and slept there for a week until a friend let me crash on her couch. That couch became my world for 6 months. Her kids ran around while I folded laundry for extra cash and scrolled through job boards on her old laptop. I remember sitting at her kitchen table one night, staring at my reflection in the dark window, whispering, "Maybe I really am trash." The words left a bitter taste, but they were honest. I didn't feel like I was moving forward. I felt stuck, like I was trapped in a loop of trying and failing. Work was never steady. Some months I juggled 2 jobs, one waiting tables and another cleaning offices at night. Other months, I couldn't even get a single steady paycheck. I learned how to stretch $1 until it snapped: rice and beans, clearance racks, thrift stores. My car broke down more times than I could count. There were mornings I walked 3 miles just to clock in, shoes soaked from rain. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion. It was the way people looked at me. Coworkers with college degrees, customers with wedding rings and shiny credit cards. They all had a way of glancing at me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. That look, it ate at me. But in the middle of all that struggle, I discovered small sparks of resilience. Once, when my boss cut my hours without warning, I picked up babysitting for a single mom in the neighborhood. Her little boy would run to the door every time I arrived, arms wide, yelling, "Diana!" He didn't care that I was broke, or that my shoes had holes. To him, I mattered. That reminded me I wasn't worthless. Another time, I joined a local library workshop on resume writing, not because I believed it would change my life, but because it was free and I needed the distraction. Sitting in that fluorescent-lit room, surrounded by strangers also trying to piece their lives together, I felt less alone. I wasn't the only one fighting uphill. Still, the silence from my brother gnawed at me. Every family photo I wasn't in, every barbecue I wasn't invited to, it reinforced the same message. I was cut off. One afternoon, about 3 years into the silence, I ran into my mother at the grocery store. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked older, smaller somehow, pushing her cart with a distracted frown. I hesitated, then called softly, "Mom!" She turned, startled, and for a split second, I thought she might hug me. But she only nodded, forcing a smile. "Diana, you look busy." We stood by the canned goods, awkward as strangers. I wanted to ask about Mark, about the family, about whether they ever mentioned me. But her eyes darted away, and I realized she wasn't going to open that door. After a few strained pleasantries, she excused herself, leaving me with a half-empty basket and a hollow feeling. I cried in my car that day, not because she ignored me, but because I realized she didn't know how to bridge the gap either. My brother's words had built a wall, and she wasn't willing to climb it. The years stacked up, each one carving deeper lines into me. I grew tougher, sharper, more resourceful. I learned to negotiate with landlords, to fix my own leaky faucets, to carry myself like I belonged in rooms that tried to push me out. But struggle has a way of testing who really stands by you. Friends I thought were permanent disappeared. Some couldn't handle my constant instability. Others simply drifted away. A few though, just a precious few, stayed. One of them was Carla, a coworker at the diner. She'd slip me extra rolls after shifts, cover for me when my bus was late, and listen without judgment when I admitted I felt like giving up. "Don't let him define you," she told me once, her hand resting firmly on mine across the break table. "Family can be cruel. But you're more than what he said." Her words sank deep. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Even in the middle of the hardest years, there were small wins. I saved enough to buy a used laptop. I started keeping a journal, scribbling late at night, capturing every frustration, every small victory, every dream I was afraid to say out loud. That journal became my private rebellion against the label of trash. Still, every holiday was a test. Thanksgiving rolled around each year like a cruel reminder. I imagined my family gathered around the same table, my brother holding court, laughter spilling into the rooms where I once belonged. And me. Alone, microwaving leftovers, pretending I didn't care. But I did care. The loneliness was heavy, a constant ache in my chest. 10 years is a long time to be invisible. Long enough to wear down your hope, long enough to make you question your worth. But here's what I didn't know back then. Those 10 years of silence and struggle were shaping me into someone stronger than I'd ever imagined. The silence between me and Jason stretched on for years, but the pain of that Thanksgiving night never truly faded. Some evenings, when I came home from my shift at the diner, peeling off my apron with the smell of fried grease clinging to my hair, I would hear his words echoing in my mind. Trash. That one word could crush me faster than any long day on my feet. But one rainy night, sitting alone in my tiny apartment, I realized something. I was either going to let his voice define the rest of my life, or I was going to drown it out with a voice of my own. That thought wasn't loud at first. It was more like a whisper, barely strong enough to rise above the noise of my self-doubt. But whispers can become storms if you let them. It started small. I picked up a used laptop from a pawn shop for $150, even though it meant skipping groceries for a week. My coworkers thought I was crazy. "Diana, you barely keep your lights on. Why waste money on that old thing?" But I knew it wasn't a waste. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was investing in myself. At first, I didn't know exactly what I was chasing. I spent nights watching free tutorials online, learning how businesses marketed themselves, how websites worked, how social media was more than just scrolling. It felt like unlocking a secret world, one where hard work and creativity could actually build something lasting. I'd sit at that wobbly kitchen table until 2 or 3 in the morning, my eyes burning, my coffee cold, teaching myself skills nobody had ever believed I could learn. One Saturday afternoon, I took a bus to the library. I hadn't been there since I was a teenager, but I remembered the smell of old pages and the quiet hush that made you feel like knowledge was alive in the air. I checked out books on entrepreneurship, branding, and customer psychology. Carrying that stack home, I felt almost giddy. For once, I wasn't weighed down by shame or bitterness. I was lifted by possibility. Of course, nothing about this journey was smooth. There were moments of embarrassment, like the time I offered to help a local thrift shop with their advertising and accidentally crashed their Facebook page. The owner was kind enough to laugh it off, but I went home that night with tears streaming down my face, convinced I'd made a fool of myself. Still, something deep inside pushed me to keep going. Failure, I realized, wasn't final. It was just feedback. The real turning point came on a Sunday morning. I was working the early shift at the diner, refilling a customer's coffee when a woman struck up a conversation. She was opening a small flower shop nearby and was frustrated with how few people knew about it. Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "I could help you with that." My hands trembled as I explained I was learning about marketing, that I could design flyers and set up her social media for almost nothing, just for the chance to prove myself. To my shock, she agreed. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, and she gave me my very first chance. That weekend, I spent every free hour designing her flyers on my old laptop, using free software that froze every 20 minutes. I walked the neighborhood, slipping those flyers under doors, pinning them to bulletin boards, and handing them out with a nervous smile. A month later, Mrs. Patterson returned to the diner just to see me. "Diana," she said, her eyes glowing, "my sales doubled. People are coming in saying they saw the flyers or found me online. You did this." I nearly dropped the coffee pot in my hands. That moment felt electric. For the first time, someone looked at me and saw not just a server, not just the black sheep of a family who had cast her aside, but someone capable. Someone valuable. From then on, sparks flew faster. Word of mouth spread, slowly at first, then faster. The thrift shop owner who once laughed about the Facebook mishap came back and asked me to give it another try. A barber down the street wanted help with his promotions. Each project became a stepping stone, each success another crack of light breaking through the darkness I had lived in for so long. But alongside the excitement, there was fear. What if I wasn't really good enough? What if this was just luck, and it would all vanish tomorrow? I battled those doubts constantly. At night, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, I would argue with myself in silence. Jason was wrong. You're not trash. Look at what you're building. But then another voice would whisper, or maybe you're fooling yourself, and sooner or later, everyone else will see it too. Those inner battles nearly crushed me more than the long shifts and tight finances ever could. Yet every time I wanted to give up, I remembered Mrs. Patterson's face. I remembered the pride in her voice when she said her sales doubled because of me. That memory became my anchor. Slowly, my perspective shifted. Instead of viewing myself as someone scraping by, I began to see myself as someone growing. I wasn't just waiting tables anymore. I was carving out a future. I even began setting boundaries at work. When my boss asked if I could cover an extra double shift, I shook my head and said, "I can't, I have another commitment." That commitment was me sitting at my laptop, building mock-up campaigns, practicing designs, and learning how to pitch to clients. For years, I had let others dictate my worth. But in those small refusals, I reclaimed a piece of it. One evening, after weeks of overwork, I sat back from my laptop, rubbed my tired eyes, and whispered, "This is it. This is the spark." It wasn't success yet. It wasn't even close. But it was the moment I stopped seeing myself as broken and started seeing myself as building. The spark wasn't about proving Jason wrong. Not yet, anyway. It was about proving myself right. That maybe, just maybe, the girl who had been called trash could rise, not because of anyone else's approval, but because she lit her own fire in the dark. I'll never forget the first morning I walked into that tiny rented office space with nothing but a laptop, a used desk, and a folding chair I bought off Craigslist. The paint on the walls was peeling, the carpet smelled faintly of mildew, and the fluorescent lights flickered like they were deciding whether to give up. But to me, it felt like a palace. For the first time in years, I wasn't just working to stay alive, I was building something of my own. At first, I didn't even call it a business. It was just me taking on freelance marketing jobs for small stores around town. A bakery that needed flyers. A mechanic who wanted someone to set up a Facebook page. None of it paid much, but every time a client came back happy, I felt a small fire burn in my chest. I was proving, to myself if no one else, that I had value. Still, the early days weren't glamorous. Most weeks I was living on instant noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. Rent was late more than once. My old car broke down so often that I started carrying jumper cables like they were an extension of my purse. There were nights I sat in that office after everyone else had gone home, staring at my computer screen, whispering to myself, "Don't quit. Just don't quit." One night, about 6 months in, I almost did. A client I had poured weeks of work into ghosted me without paying. That $600 was supposed to cover my rent. I remember sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel, my hands shaking with anger and panic. I thought about calling my mom, but I couldn't bear the thought of her hearing the weakness in my voice. And calling my brother, Jason? That wasn't even an option. He had already made it clear years ago that I was trash. Trash doesn't ask for help. Trash survives on its own. But then something unexpected happened. A local cafe owner I had helped earlier that spring called me out of the blue. "Diana," she said, "I've been telling people about you. My friend who runs a boutique needs marketing. You should talk to her." That one recommendation turned into 2, then 3. And slowly, like water finding cracks in the pavement, opportunities started flowing my way. The more clients I worked with, the more I began to see a pattern. These small businesses weren't failing because they had bad products. They were failing because nobody knew about them. They didn't understand branding, social media, or customer engagement. But I did. And for the first time in my life, I realized I had a skill that could not only feed me but also lift others up. With that realization, I made a choice. I stopped treating my work like temporary gigs and started treating it like a company. I named it Harbor Marketing Solutions, because in my mind, I wanted it to be a safe harbor for small businesses who felt lost at sea. I designed a simple logo, built a website, and even spent my last $200 printing business cards. The next few years were a blur of 12-hour days, trial and error, and a whole lot of prayer. There were times I stumbled. My first hire quit after 2 weeks, saying she didn't believe the company would last. I once accidentally double-booked 2 clients for the same photo shoot and had to beg one to reschedule, offering free services just to keep them from walking away. Each mistake felt like a punch to the gut, but each one also taught me how to stand taller. I learned how to negotiate without apologizing. I learned how to look someone in the eye and say, "This is my rate," and not flinch when they frowned. I learned how to read contracts, how to manage cash flow, and how to build trust, not with grand promises, but with small, consistent actions. And slowly, survival began turning into stability. Stability turned into growth. One afternoon, I walked into a client's office to drop off a campaign report, and she introduced me to someone as Diana, the CEO of Harbor Marketing. I almost laughed out loud. CEO. Me. But on the drive home, the word echoed in my mind. I wasn't just hustling anymore. I wasn't just scraping by. I was running something real. As the company grew, so did my sense of self. I started hiring a team, first one assistant, then a designer, then a social media manager. I made sure to treat them the way I had once wished someone would treat me, with respect, patience, and belief. When they succeeded, I celebrated them. When they messed up, I didn't shame them, I taught them. Maybe it was my own scars that made me that way, but I wanted my company to be the opposite of what Jason had made me feel. I wanted it to be a place where people knew they mattered. Of course, success didn't erase the bitterness of the past overnight. There were still nights when I lay awake, thinking about that Thanksgiving dinner, hearing Jason's voice in my head calling me trash. Sometimes, I wondered if the fire driving me was really passion, or just the desire to prove him wrong. Maybe it was both. But either way, it kept me moving. One of the most unforgettable turning points came 5 years in. A major regional chain approached me after hearing about my work through word of mouth. They wanted a complete rebranding campaign. The contract was worth more money than I had made in my first 3 years combined. When I signed it, I went to the bathroom, locked the stall and cried. Not the broken kind of tears I'd shed in silence for years, but the kind that come when you finally realize, I did it. I'm not trash. I never was. Looking back, I can see how every little step, every night of hunger, every rejection, shaped me. If Jason had supported me back then, maybe I wouldn't have had the same drive. Maybe I wouldn't have built harbor marketing the way I did, with grit, empathy, and relentless determination. In a twisted way, his cruelty had been the spark, but my survival had forged the fire. By the time I moved harbor marketing into a proper downtown office with glass doors and my name on the wall, I no longer saw myself as the girl begging for scraps of respect at a family dinner table. I was a leader, a builder, a survivor turned CEO. And yet, deep inside, I knew my journey wasn't just about money or titles. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my worth, and my voice. I had climbed out of the shadows of shame and into the light of success, not because someone gave me a chance, but because I created one. I didn't know it yet, but the day was coming when that light would shine directly into Jason's world. And when it did, he would see exactly who I had become. The ocean was restless that evening, the waves crashing against the rocks with a rhythm that almost matched the pounding of my heart. I stood on the balcony of my new home, the salt air whipping through my hair as I clutched a glass of water in my hand. The house, my house, still felt surreal. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the endless horizon, polished wood floors stretched beneath my feet, and every corner whispered a reminder of how far I had come. Yet, even surrounded by beauty, my mind wandered back to darker memories. The word trash had been hurled at me once, burning itself into my bones. Sometimes I still heard it, like a ghost clinging to the edges of my success. I told myself I had moved past it, but the truth was, it lingered. That night, just as the sun began to sink into the ocean, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink, I heard it, a sharp knock at the front door. It startled me. Few people came unannounced, and I hadn't invited anyone. My first thought was that it might be a delivery, but something about the timing, the insistence of the sound, made my chest tighten. I set the glass down and walked slowly through the living room, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The knock came again, firm, deliberate, almost demanding. I hesitated at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. Whoever it was, they weren't going away. When I finally pulled it open, the sight before me knocked the air out of my lungs. Jason stood there. My brother. The man who had cut me off for 10 long years. He looked older, worn down by life. His once sharp jawline had softened, his hair was grayer than I remembered, and there were lines etched deep across his forehead. His eyes, those same piercing eyes that once looked at me with disdain, now looked tired, almost desperate. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The crashing of the waves outside filled the silence between us. My throat tightened, my mind racing back through every insult, every humiliation, every year of silence. And now, here he was, standing at my door like none of it had happened. "Diana," he finally said, his voice low and unsteady. I didn't know where else to go. Hearing my name from his lips sent a chill down my spine. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But another part, the younger sister still buried deep inside, longed for answers. I stepped aside, my voice cold. "Come in." He entered slowly, glancing around at the high ceilings, the art on the walls, the open view of the ocean. His lips parted slightly, like he couldn't believe I was the one who lived here. I watched his every move, my arms crossed tightly across my chest, keeping a barrier between us. "Nice place," he muttered, almost under his breath. I didn't respond. I wanted him to feel the weight of the silence, the same silence he had left me with for 10 years. Finally, I asked, "Why are you here, Jason?" He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped together, his gaze fixed on the floor. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he sighed heavily. Things haven't been easy. I lost my job a while back. The bills piled up. And he hesitated, his voice cracking. I need help. The words hit me like a punch. This was the same man who once told me I was worthless. The same man who turned his back when I needed him most. And now he was here, in my home, asking for help. I felt a swirl of emotions, anger, disbelief, even a flicker of pity. But mostly, I felt the raw sting of irony. The roles had reversed. I sat across from him, my eyes never leaving his face. "Do you remember," I said slowly, "the last thing you called me before you cut me off?" His eyes darted to mine, guilt flashing across his face. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. We both knew. "Trash," I said softly, the word heavy in the air between us. "That's what I was to you. And now you're here, asking me for help." Jason's face fell. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in my life, he looked small to me. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was angry, jealous. I don't even know. I thought you'd never make it, and I wanted to cut ties before you dragged me down. But I was the one who fell. And you," he glanced around at the house again. "You built this." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Yes, I built this. Without you. Without anyone. Do you know how many nights I went hungry? How many times I thought I wouldn't make it? While you, my own brother, sat in comfort, convinced I was nothing." The tension in the room was suffocating. Jason bowed his head, his voice trembling. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I'm asking, not as the brother who failed you, not as the man who hurt you, but as someone who has nothing left. Please, Diana, help me." I studied him, every wrinkle in his face, every crack in his voice. My chest ached with the weight of the decision before me. Part of me wanted to turn away, to let him feel the same abandonment he had forced on me. But another part, the part that had clawed her way out of the dark, knew the truth. My strength wasn't measured by revenge. It was measured by what I chose to do now. I leaned back, taking a deep breath. "You're right," I said finally. "You don't deserve my forgiveness. And I don't owe you anything. But I also won't let your choices dictate who I am anymore." Jason's eyes lifted, searching mine. "I'll help you," I said firmly. "But not because you're my brother. Because I refuse to let bitterness define me. I worked too hard to rise above that. You'll have conditions. You'll rebuild your life step by step, and I'll hold you accountable. If you can't accept that, there's the door." Tears filled his eyes, and for the first time in my memory, Jason looked broken, not in anger, but in humility. He nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes." The crashing waves outside seemed to quiet, as if even the ocean was listening. I didn't know if Jason would truly change. But in that moment, standing in my own home, I realized something profound. I wasn't trash. I never had been. I was the one holding the power now. The power to choose compassion over cruelty, strength over spite. And as Jason sat across from me, a man stripped of pride and arrogance, I knew one thing for certain. The knock on the door hadn't just been his arrival. It had been my moment of final closure.